10 years ago, if you had told me that I should be getting my news from Instagram, I would have laughed you out of the room. I'm a journalist by training. The hell are you talking about? And I may have spoken about how social media will never replace journalism because journalism has layers of accountability. The journalism that is supposed to have layers of accountability is the New York Times, whereas I'm watching direct information from journalists, actually, but also
Mhm.
doctors and also school children in
Absolutely.
Gaza
Yep.
happening on the ground. So the structures are going to be completely reshuffled.
Welcome, Anna Badkhen, to the Radical Futures podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. And I feel like I've known you so long. I've known of your work. I know there was a lovely piece published on you in the magazine I used to edit, Warscapes. And finally, here we are. And I'm really excited to have this conversation, even though we meet in the inappropriate sense because the world is just falling apart and we are both so broken about it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I think it's actually a great time to talk about radical futures.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just very quickly, I will say that you are a prolific writer in the true sense of the word. You have 7 books in your name, huge list of awards and honors and acclaim. You have a new book coming out called To See Beyond, and it's coming out in April 2026 from Bellevue Literary Press. And your last book was published a couple of years ago called Bright Unbearable Reality, which assembled 11 essays from many different countries and several continents, actually. And what's exciting about you is you're so comfortable experimenting with form, even though you're always returning, in a sense, to the essay, I feel. I could be wrong about that. And all your work blends journalism, poetry, personal, political in very evocative ways. You are, in a way, an oracle, a steer also of the way our world works. And it's really important to have your insights always. So today I wanted to, because there's so much to say. I wanted to hone in actually on an essay you wrote in May 2025, recently, called "The Pen and the Sword: Censorship Threatens Us All," and it was published in the Markers Review. And it was a response to our sort of despairing condition as we watch, witness, consume even a genocide unfolding before our eyes in Palestine. And it was also calling out writers and scholars, but literary, cultural, journalistic, media, academic institutions that have been unmasked in the past 2 years, places that have been playing a part in deepening structures of censorship. So, and you go back to your own past. You speak a little bit about your own experience with it. So, I just wanted to start there. Why did you write this essay?
I feel like, Palestine is the great unmasker. It's horrendous to be utilizing a genocide, an ongoing genocide in such a way. But unfortunately, it's a great teacher, as my colleague and friend Huda Fakhreddin, you had her on your show
Yeah.
to say Palestine teaches us all. Palestine does teach us all, and Palestine teaches us all about our moral clarity and lack thereof. Um, so since the beginning of this latest genocide in Gaza, um, it seems like the literary establishment and, all the so-called liberal intelligentsia in the United States and in the West overall has split into, I would say, it's 3 groups. Groups that are genocide deniers, groups that are unable to stand by in silence, and then a group that is racist enough to be okay with not saying anything, right? Um, so maybe the essay is about this latter group
Yeah.
of people. But you know what triggered me writing this essay, and it's not the kind of work I normally do, right? It's not overall a literary essay. So it's what triggered it was I was invited by Pen America to moderate a an event at the World Voices fest their annual festival. I'm boycotting Pen America as a lot of writers do because of their absolutely despicable treatment of Palestinian colleagues, Palestinian journalists, Palestinian writers, and overall inaction on Palestine. And this is what I, explained to them when I politely said no. And I politely also pointed out that perhaps their stance is due to the fact that their second in command used to be a, uh, a vice president, I think, for legal affairs. I don't quite recall her position, but she was a high up person in the leadership in the ADL, the Anti Defamation League, which we all know is a Zionist propaganda mouthpiece. And then I posted my response also on social media because this is what I do, because that's what I can do, right? To encourage those people who are racist enough to be in the middle to actually take a side. Uh, and after I posted that on response on social media, I received you know, what basically amounted to a threat from the president of Pen America, which I quote in the article. And
Yes.
and you know, who am I, right? I lived very comfortably during the war, to paraphrase Ilya Kaminsky's poem. I'm alive, I have food, I have shelter, alhamdulillah. Um, but I also grew up in the Soviet Union, and
Hmm.
I became a journalist. I became a writer in post-Soviet Russia that was still very much a totalitarian
Yeah.
police state. And it occurred to me that you learn to recognize the signals your body sends you. And my body responded in a way that triggered memories for me. And I was like, oh my God, my body is responding the same way
Yeah.
it to respond when I was 20 years old. And I was a young journalist, 20, 25, when I was working mostly in Russia and covering news in Russia. And then I realized that my body had been responding like that for some time. And I started thinking about all the instances of censorship that wasn't the kind of censorship maybe our audiences are used to imagining, like, strike through, or we will never publish you again. But very kind of insidious, don't you dare speak like that, or we are not comfortable with the potential fallout, or
Mhm.
suddenly we love this piece and suddenly actually we can't publish it. Those situations. The article is not, the essay is not tonally correct for us, etc., etc. And that's the thing. The thing is that I trust myself to identify censorship because I have a long and celebrated past with it,
Yeah.
as a former journalist in Russia, and also a a person who grew up in Russia, right? I grew up in the Soviet
Mhm.
Union, uh,
Yeah.
which was, you know, a whole machine of censorship.
Those who haven't read the essay, it starts with the very scary, menacing comment. Don't you have a kid to go home to? Don't you have other priorities? What are you doing?
Right.
Um,
But it's not,
and
Yeah, when you're being when you have an infant at home and you're being told, "Don't you have a baby at home?" They don't mean you have other priorities. They mean you have a baby, we know where
I
the
know.
baby is, we know how to get you, right? Like, but again, I felt like I could maybe educate our audiences about how do we know we're being censored, right? I was
Exactly.
once in an artist residency that was a very abusive artist residency in the United States,
Wow.
and at one point I got called to have coffee with the PR person who worked for the residency. And she said, and she sat me down and she said, "Well, I just wanted to understand when you say the residency is complicit in whitewashing, what do you mean?" And we both sitting across the table from each other, knowing exactly that she knows exactly what I mean, right? She's
Right.
just this is just a way of intimidating someone, right? Or, when I was working in Russia, I had a government minder who was supposed to mind my steps. And so occasionally he would call me up, you
Yeah.
know, and say, "Hey, I see you just got into the airport. Weren't you supposed to tell me next time you're supposed, like, just reminding you that you're
Watched.
being watched." Right. So the United States is not yet there. What I'm seeing is a very rapid tumble down into a more kind of Russian circa 1995
Yeah.
version, or actually Russia
Mhm.
circa 2001 version. Putin is
Mhm.
just right power.
Starting.
Some television stations disappear, familiar radio stations, get to shut down, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, what's dangerous, much more dangerous than uh, the direction that the US government is taking is the direction that the US so-called liberal intelligentsia is taking, hence
Absolutely.
this.
Absolutely. And that's what I wanted to have you unpack somewhat more, because you're speaking about dealing with, then they're barely even veiled threats, right? You have a kid at home. Oh, I can't believe you got to this place. Why did you not tell me? There's a clarity there in the kind of big brother surveillance. We're watching your body is under threat type of thing. Whereas as we descend into that in the United States, and of course, Israel has already been there for years and years, and as we align with those ways of doing things, incarceration, all the craziness with the ICE raids and the detentions, all those threats are very much lingering in the air. But when we come back to the people who make news, who have platforms, who can influence, who can teach us, and we see them absolutely cowardly and totally descended into silence. uh many people who will in privately will tell you they are absolutely appalled and can't believe what's happening. This is so scary. And then you wonder, like, what's at stake, right? And what's at stake sometimes is your reputation, your right to publish again. Will you ever manage to publicize whatever it is you're selling in the future, all those kinds of things. And then that brings us to this horrible thing called self censorship, right? And I had some years ago, I had an academic book about the Cold War, the cultural Cold War. And one of the ways in which the US operated within that was that they set in motion certain structures for magazines and things like that, where the editorial policy or the way the craft was introduced to the writers led to ways in which the writers, say, censored themselves, and or the editors censored certain ways, and they didn't even know they were doing it. And I just wanted you to talk about this soft forms, because you're very keenly aware, and in your essay certainly points at ways in which ways in which this silence is self-imposed. So I want to know, and you're talking about editors, for example, who will who are running things. There's an essay in there called that you published with Agni, and you had a bit of a tussle before you published it, and then finally it went into Agni, and I think you were happy with how it turned out, called Mythologizing Disaster. But you were talking about the ways in which you were rejected, things you were told, and instances like that. So I wanted us to unpack a little bit that arsenal of censorship.
I've been doing this for 30 years, right? I, of course, have received more rejections than acceptance letters, as any colleague of mine probably has,
Mhm.
I imagine. Um, how do we know how do we tell the difference between they didn't like it and this got censored? Right? I think it's a very
Mhm.
fine, there's a very fine line because nobody's going to say, well, most publishing spaces won't tell you right off the bat, we are not going to publish this because we're not going to publish anything
Where's
like
nihilist?
this. But there's right. But there's, well, one magazine actually did tell me, they didn't feel that they had the capacity to deal with the potential fallout, whatever that
Mm.
meant, right? Um, One magazine said it's not tonally right for us. And it took that particular magazine maybe half a year change their tone, shall we say, on the genocide in Gaza. What do we have to lose? Well, everything, actually, right? I can lose my job. Um, we know that in academia, people have been losing their positions, which means my livelihood, because that's
Yeah.
how I earn my keep. Uh, and yes, I can have difficulty publishing, which is another way in which I earn my keep. So ultimately, yes, I
Mhm.
do have a lot to lose. However, given what I wake up to and what I go to bed to every day
Mhm.
for the last, is it the day 672 of genocide today? I mean, right?
Yeah, I know.
f- it, it, you know, who cares? Right?
I know.
I will be okay, right? No one's firebombing my rental apartment. So,
Right.
you know, I think we're talking about some sort of moral sense of proportion, right? I also imagine that if the journalists who I know at the New York Times are disgusted by the absolutely abominable coverage of the genocide at their newspaper, which, by the way, should be it's so complicit in this division in the United States. It really should go on trial the way Radio Demir went on trial after Rwanda, because it absolutely is
Mhm.
complicit in these creating this caste of um, progressive, except for Palestine, the PEP cast, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure that if every single one of my colleagues, my former colleagues, these journalists I know personally from my life as a journalist,
Mhm.
decided to walk out of the newsroom until the dweebs who write these headlines uh, change what they write,
Yeah.
that would have an effect.
Absolutely.
That would have an effect because these are journalists with names. These are journalists who could change things. I don't know what stops,
I know.
uh, you know,
I know. I'm literally almost asking the wrong person this question, right? I don't know what stops people from like a
collective walkout.
full blown walkout. It's a full blown resignation. I mean, New York Times, I agree. They should be put on trial, and I hope I live to see the moment where something like this would happen. I have two things that come out of what you're saying. One is, I've spent a lot of years thinking about publishing structures, right? Whether it's journalism, whether it's newspapers or magazines, and so on. And in general, there seems to be there seems to be an impossibility around strengthening what I would say more radical or alternative publishing publishing structures. So I will speak to people who are 100 pro Palestine, who are absolutely every day on social media or wherever they get the opportunity are for Palestine, but they will not subscribe to the New York Times and they will not decline an invitation when they are asked to write for the New York Times. And when I've confronted friends about that, they say the truth is it's the only thing that will reach an audience. So even if I get my little tepid version of resistance in there, it's okay. I accept that. And I can't get behind this. And I can't get behind this. And I don't know. Are we so out of options? Is there no other way something can go viral or something can reach the public? I don't know. How do you feel about this?
I love this conversation. Let's talk about radical futures, okay? Let's talk about this is I'm this is what I'm imagining here. What I'm imagining is that, and we're both scholars of history, right? I by necessity because I am a writer, you by profession. So, I'm imagining that what we're witnessing around the world, not just in Palestine or in Ukraine or in Alaska or in the United States or in Brazil, everywhere in the world, we're witnessing the death throes of a way of doing the world
Yeah.
that we have been performing for the last 600-700 years, right? It's a cycle. The cycle is ending. When something ends, it usually ends in agony. These absolutely horrendous, and we may not even survive them, but I'm going to imagine, I have to because I'm a writer and I teach also. So I have to imagine for the sake of my students, I have to imagine that we will, right? So what does it look like to imagine what comes after? And I'm extremely grateful for my students and for being able to spend a lot of time with young people, because look at what they're imagining. They're reimagining gender. Actually, forget it. It's done. They have reimagined gender,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
5 years,
I
10 years, it's done. So they're reimagining hierarchies. So the New York Times, basically the only newspaper that people read in the United States who consider themselves, liberal intellectuals. It it's part of that. It's part of that hierarchical structure. If you go to remember the protests in 2020, the anti-racist protests, and
Yeah.
how the organizers were not just one organizer or two organizers. It was horizontal
Many
organization.
coalitions.
Many,
Hmm.
yes, exactly. So, and it was organized by very, very young people. And I
Hmm.
think that I mean, I think that maybe even my imagining is probably outdated, right? Because I'm another generation. But I think they are already on the way to reimagining how we even get the news. Bekti, 10 years ago, if you had told me that I should be getting my news from Instagram, I would have laughed you out of the room. I'm a journalist by training. The hell are you talking about? And I may have spoken about how social media will never replace journalism because journalism has layers of accountability, blah, blah, blah. But what we're watching is literally the journalism that is supposed to have layers of accountability is the New York Times, whereas I'm watching direct information from journalists actually, but also
Mhm.
doctors and also school children in
Absolutely.
Gaza about happening on the ground. So the structures are going to be completely reshuffled, right? They're going to be completely
Sure.
it's a major earthquake that we're experiencing all over the it's a massive just tectonic plates are moving and
I'm going to poke some holes in that just because I am I am so so down and out. I know you are too, but and I think we need to just kind of amp each other up a little bit more. So one of the things that I've been doing on this podcast is I spoke with Maura Finkelstein, I spoke with Huda, I spoke to a few people who have really been pushed to the limits, of being sanctioned, censored, fired, all that stuff. And the people that are doing that, the people that allow them are these revered youth that we speak of, through their WhatsApp groups, through their Instagrams, through their fluency in social media. So then I'm like, am I? Are we moving towards radical right wing futures? Or are we just going to just be a world that's completely split in half all the time? Like your and my algorithmic reality, the doctors from Gaza, the victims, the people documenting their own devastation. Everybody's not getting that feed, right? There's some people who are completely within the algorithmic reality where it's just Hollywood and Bollywood and all that kind of stuff too. So and then this so then I love the idea of this youth. They have remade gender, but then you have this whole other side, that is getting getting their own professors fired, who are generating a whole other type of reality. How do we do with this? What do we do? We need to be two planets or something. It's confounding to me. There's your
well,
challenge.
okay, let's okay, I accept your challenge. um let's uh let's talk about two things. Let's talk about love and uh, let's talk about love. So you were talking, and I was thinking about that Baldwin quote when he says the world is held together by the love of very few people, and how
Oh,
and how love is something that love is an active verb, right? We have to, and it has to be practiced. It has to be maintained. It has to be. Um, it cannot be just you know
mm,
placidly existing. It has to be a choice. And I'm also gonna bring in Kutsi, right, the South African writer who talked actually during his Jerusalem Prize acceptance speech in 1984. He talked about the failure of love as what makes it possible for apartheid exist. So if you let's combine these two things and let's talk about love as let's talk about the idea get back to like my notion of the world order, and let's say that this world order is facilitated by an absolute failure of love, right? It is the fact that 79% of Israeli Jews in a poll this week that Haaretz reported yesterday said that they're not troubled or not troubled at all by the genocide in Gaza is yes, that's because of the algorithms they're getting, right? Yes, it's massive propaganda. And it is also because I refuse to believe that there is a place in the world where people are just evil, right? That I cannot. I've been to so many places in the world where evil shit
yeah.
is happening. I just reject the notion that people are fundamentally evil. This is taught behavior.
Mm,
Right, because Israeli Jews for the last 77 years have been taught that Palestinians are less than human, not deserving of love. The same conversation is happening in Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. literally the same language. They're not humans. They're semi-humans. They're Untermenschen. They're not right, and that is what allows for a lot of Russians to be perfectly okay with what is happening in Ukraine, et cetera. Right? You know this. We know that this is since the beginning
I
of
know.
the world,
Time.
right? The time. This is we dehumanize uh, humans in order to destroy them, right? And
Yeah.
in order to not love them. So then we have to, and this is what we do as writers. This is what we have the capacity to cultivate. We have the capacity to cultivate love. We have the
Yeah.
capacity to talk about love, and we have. Um, I think basically my answer to your question is actually both. Yes, we are definitely watching the rise of the ultra right, but that is, I think, the agony, right?
Yeah.
The death throes is um this absolute agonizing stage that
Mhm.
has that then self-destructs. And that's
Yeah.
also what you teach, and that's why I step in my next. You asked me what my next my class is going to be this semester. My class this semester is going to be themed love. I haven't told them yet,
Mhm.
but the curriculum, we read very broadly. We read across time. We read across language. Well, we read in English, obviously, in translation, but we read across
Mhm.
cultures and across continents.
Yeah.
But my challenge to my students this semester is going to be to write exclusively about love, not romantic love, although that is wonderful, but to seek out love in the daily uh, life
Yeah.
and in the daily reading, and to see what is it like
Mhm.
to act
Yeah.
and walk through life with love.
Yeah. That's really, really beautiful. And it's quite moving, actually. And I think what I'm hearing you say, coming off of the Baldwin who says our world is held together by the love of very few people, you're saying that those very few people need to really practice harder at love, and and yes, hatred is taught, but love needs to be taught too, is what I'm getting, and you're going to do that. And that's a really beautiful. I agree, I agree. We have to just do more, those of us who can see the bright unbearable reality. We must practice harder at love. You're absolutely right. Thank you. So, Anna, one of the things I was thinking, since I have you here, and since I tend to not focus as much as I ethically should on the things that are going on in Ukraine, and I know you speak the language. I'm sure you have some sort of insights. I mean, this has just gone on and on. What do you think? How does this end? What is going on? What can you tell us?
I don't speak Ukrainian. I speak Russian.
I know.
I am trying to actually translate. This is a wonderful book of poems by
Hmm.
Victor Shilo. Um, Trying to translate some, but what's going to happen in Ukraine, I'm afraid, is that they will be forced to give Russia, what Russia already has, and also probably surrender their hopes for EU membership
My
and
gosh.
NATO, obviously, membership. But I think also, I don't know if it's worse,
Hmm.
but it's definitely very imperial. I think that they will be forced to surrender mineral rights to the United States.
Hmm.
So that is how that
Yeah.
ends for now. But again, I'm not an expert. I'm uh,
I know.
uh, I'm an observer. Maybe also not as close an observer as I should be, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, then that implicates us both in in what comes to my mind. You know, I feel like when you're pro-Palestinian, pro kind of in things in Sudan, all those kind of viewpoints, we're always accusing people of selective empathy. You know, selective empathy, selective sympathy, selective posting, all of those kinds of things. But then I have to kind of look at myself and wonder about my own selective empathy and having seen sort of the Ukraine thing unfold, and I know that there are horrible conflicts going on everywhere in the world. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, what do you make of this idea of selective empathy? Is it just our condition? Are we just that's how we're going to roll, or is there a politics also to empathy in some way?
I think, again, the origin of evil is the same, right? It's
Mhm.
the same absence of love, and it's the same um, dehumanization of a group that allows the genocide in Gaza, the invasion in Ukraine, the melting of the ice in the Arctic, right? They're all the same thing. They're
Mhm.
all the results of few wealthy, white, usually, but not exclusively, men, usually, but not exclusively,
Mhm.
um, choosing to prioritize themselves and people like them at the expense of, you know, the this unseeing of people, of people as people. I imagine that somewhat there is a reaction that we're
Mhm.
experiencing about, okay, Ukraine gets so much coverage
Sure.
by the Western press, Palestine gets none,
Yeah.
right? The I mean, I hate it, but let's compare numbers, right? Let's look at numbers. I don't see anything that would justify
Mm.
this. I think my feeling, maybe my gut feeling, is that Ukraine has attention. Let me turn mine to
Yeah.
where attention's lacking, which is kind of the professional problem.
No, no. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
I think that's crucial also in a way. And when things started in Ukraine, it was given the precise attention we had been demanding of so many places, you know, and the sort of lure for the journalists of like the whiteness, you know, things like they don't look like refugees or they don't look, this doesn't look war torn. How can we do this? All the outrage that you would like to be better placed in lots of places wasn't there in some way. So there's a reaction to, you know, to some of that. I agree.
Well, multiple things. I think for me, I think it was the special rapporteur on Palestine, Albanese, right? She had um, she said that the reason we are doing this labor of talking about Palestine so much is because our governments should be doing that
Exactly.
labor, right? We're doing doing the labor that our governments should be doing. In Ukraine, I think most governments, except for China, Russia, and was it India? Russia's important, well, Belarus, etc. Everybody spoke uh, the said the right things, right? And everybody acted,
The right way.
maybe not enough, but acted in the right direction at
Sure.
least, right? But we are witnessing an extermination campaign, and
Mhm.
our governments are doing nothing, saying nothing. And that,
Yeah.
I think, is why we feel the responsibility to focus our attention there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, that does not negate the suffering in Ukraine, and that does not negate the suffering in Sudan or Somalia or,
Anyway,
um,
yeah, absolutely.
suffering is not a thing that should ever be quantified.
Mhm. Let me pivot to just you. And I just want to, since I have you here, and I know many people will listen to this podcast to just hear a bit about how you started writing, what moved you to do it, how come you write in English, and all those kinds of things. So I just wanted to know, how did you get into get into writing, and was it your first was it always to write against the state? Was that always the intention? How did it all start?
Yeah, I got a job as a secretary, receptionist at this English language newspaper in St. Petersburg, my hometown. I was born in Leningrad.
Oh.
It is now called St. Petersburg again, and I was a really bad receptionist. I not I had a telephone with buttons, and I had to press the correct buttons, and I was so overwhelmed. Um, think I told, like, somebody to fuck off during my second day on the job, and, one of the it was a small newspaper, it had, 3, writers at the time, and, the editor said, "Maybe she can try writing." Just clearly, I was incapable of, the
Mhm.
job they hired me to do, and so I did try writing, and then I never stopped. So it was I walked into it. And my
Mm.
tongue, my bad manners and my impatience. My beat, was, what we called in 1995 human rights, which I guess would
Mhm.
be called social justice
Wow.
now, and so that, uh, I mean, picture Russia in 1995, um, 2 years after 4 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, 2 years
Mm.
after President Yeltsin bombed his own parliament with tanks.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was,
Yeah.
fun times.
There was a lot to report. My gosh.
Lot to report. And then, I moved to Moscow in 2000, started freelancing for English and American newspapers, and,
Wow.
I was freelancing for the San Francisco Chronicle when, September the 11th happened, and they asked me to go to Afghanistan for them, and I went. Many, many people who were based in Moscow were
Yeah.
sent to Afghanistan because, there was a
Sure.
convenient, connection, geographically.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Afghanistan seems to be so seems to be, I don't want to say the word central, but it seems to be part of your origin story in some way as a writer. At least that's how I see it. You have quite a few books on Afghanistan, and Afghanistan comes back and forth. I think that's where you, maybe I would say, did a lot of your learning. Am I right to say that?
was it Churchill who called it the crucible of empires? Who was it? It was some ogre, some colonial ogre. Um,
Gosh.
I mean, I had been on the periphery of war before. I had traveled to around Chechnya, but Afghanistan was really the first kind of shooting war that I witnessed, and I was very young. I was 26 um,
Mhm.
in 2001, 25, 26. So, um, and I did spend a lot of time going back and forth. So 10 formative years of
Mm.
my life definitely spent uh, learning about
Yeah.
the people.
As we seem to be in an epoch of forever wars, a question that I have turned in the past into events, and it's a thing that comes back again and again. how to write about war?
I think that there are many ways to write about war. And the way I chose for myself to write about war is to write about people who didn't choose to be in it. Probably more than 90% of uh, casualties in contemporary wars are people who, in Gaza, I don't even know, we should not call it a war, but in violence, mass violence events, most casualties, most victims are, and most survivors are civilians. So what I have always chosen to focus on is people. I also um, have a wonderful friend. I'm very lucky to have a wonderful friend in Paul Stoller, who is an anthropologist, um, uh, with many, many decades of experience. And he recently wrote an essay about somebody asked him what it meant to be an ethical anthropologist. And he said, to be an ethical anthropologist, you have to invest love and loss in the community you're describing. And I love that line because that really, it can also be a question how to write ethically about mass violence. You have to actually have personal investment in it.
Hmm.
So I think today, thank goodness for the internet, the best journalism or the best storytelling from wars is done by people who are experiencing them. Uh, when I started being a writer, um, the internet wasn't, we didn't have this much access. So, mostly this kind of writing was done by people like me for work. Um, yeah. But I think it's pretty easy, at least for me, it's pretty easy to become very invested in love and loss when I'm, having a relation, a community relationship, a friendship with people.
Hmm. You pay a lot of attention to craft. It's very clear. Your writing is intentional. It really engages with the world in a way that is also contained and expressed through form. It's there is no kind of sloppy throwaway. Here's a fact and let me throw it in your face. Here's a number. It's never like that. And I think we have reached a point uh, today where craft, at least in the Western world, has started to now get a bad name because craft becomes a way to hide behind politics or all the dangerous, important, urgent types of things. So, what would you say to somebody who wants to embrace craft, storytelling, form, style, poetic modes, but also speak about the gruesome and the urgent and the political and the immediate in some way? How do you navigate these two?
What I teach my students is to imagine every sentence or every paragraph as a diamond. It has
Mm,
to be so hard packed with information, facts, whatever you want to call it, politics, numbers, truth. Let's call it truth, right? It has to be so hard packed with truth that it can cut through glass. And it has to be so beautiful that you can't take your eyes off of it. Because, right, then you're looking at it. Then the language you use is working not to obfuscate or conceal or prettify, but it works to make it impossible to look away. Um, But I think it's a forever question, right? I actually just finished a draft of a novel in which that is about that question, the question of, by making beauty, do we hide from, do we uh, make reality more palatable? But people who read books, at
Mhm.
least, I don't know, there are many people who read books for different reasons, but I think people who read my books read, for one of the reasons they read is they want to experience beauty, the pleasure of beauty, right? Like when we walk into a a, a, a a concert, we want to experience beauty. When we walk into an art museum or an art gallery, we want to experience beauty. Beauty can be a vehicle.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, interesting.
I put some I put some mascara on for this interview so that, people can, hey, it would be more pleasant for them to listen to the
Absolutely.
difficult things I say.
Absolutely. 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 No, I understand what you're saying. It's a sort of a stealth. I like the stealth of the propaganda. Propaganda always gets a bad word.
Absolutely.
When it's on my
Remember
side, I'm all for it.
remember I grew up in the Soviet Union, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What was interesting when I was writing the my Cold War book was that I learned the ways in which the US cultural warriors, people who were manipulating information in the Cold War, um, managed to turn propaganda into a bad word. And propaganda was only done by USSR. Americans didn't do any, any propaganda. They were always hiding behind beautiful, craft and liberal both sidism and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting everything that you're saying.
that's the thing that language does, right? When we talk about uh, Palestine, we talk about terrorists. We talk about, we we don't talk about people who are fighting for their land. We're not talking about, survivors'
Mhm.
resistance to colonialism. Language, it's the
Yeah.
lion hunt and the hunter narrative.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask you one more question. You have given us many different ways to think about this, but as a synthesizer, what is the role of the writer in a time of genocide, in a time like today?
Zbigniew Herbert wrote this poem, The Envoy of Mr. Cogito, which I only know in translation. It says, "You were saved not in order to live. You have little time. You must give testimony."
Wow.
We have an obligation to remember to speak with humility. We have an obligation to remember the difference between professional risks and the daily life and death of the people to whom we owe witness. The poem also has these lines: "Look at your own clown's face in the mirror. Repeat, weren't there better ones than I?" Do not take yourself too seriously. Um,
Yeah.
take other people very seriously.
Wow. Oh, you're going to make me cry. Thank you. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for all the beautiful things you said. And thank you for walking us through poetry and love and, beauty in times like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to talk to you.